Some years ago here, John Gilmore, a beloved former minister here, stood here and asked, "So why am I the only black person in this room?" Hard, uncomfortable words. Talking about race in America is an awkward subject, especially in public. There's clearly an elephant in the room, or several of them, and they are taking up a lot of space hanging off of the circle carpet as we all walk carefully around them, pretending they're not there. It is not a subject that we white folk talk about well or comfortably. Words have multiple meanings. They have nuances. And phrases often have loose, vague, common use meanings and very specific technical meanings. What theory means in general conversation is wildly different from what it means to science. If I say, my theory is, you know it's a thought I just had, and it's probably a wild-ass guess. If I talk about the theory of relativity or the theory of evolution, you should know, that I am talking about things that are extremely well supported, tested, and there is plenty of hard evidence to bolster them. So in talking about racial issues in America, I'm going to use some very specific language, and you need not to conflate it with the loose, vague, sloppy common usage. Because if you do that, you will be confused, you will probably be angry, and you may feel hurt. And my friends, while this is about us, this is so not about you. Bias and prejudice refer to unjustified, inadequately supported opinions and feelings about someone because of something that they are. You may have a prejudice against someone from France, either because your father or grandfather did and you heard all about it, or because you had a run-in with some rude person who was French. That's not a good reason to dislike anyone who's French. We are all of us prejudiced, because that's how the human mind works. But we can be aware of it. We can work on that. Racism refers to the use of some form of power, not just simply prejudice. It talks about legal or social power being used against someone of another race because of prejudice. And so there isn't really racism much against white people in America, because prejudice isn't racism. It has to be empowered racism, because somehow in the law, or because of your or my position of power, or the social structure that we all live in, empowers you and your prejudice to do more than just be a jerk. And white supremacy. White supremacy is a complex system of interlocking structures that teach racial prejudice and help empower it. What is often called white supremacy is just the tip of the iceberg. It's the extreme cases like the Klan, the openly racist groups that teach and celebrate the idea of white supremacy as an ideology. But what they are celebrating and supporting is the idea that the system and the systems and the institutions and the people running the institutions should favor white people and disadvantage people who are not currently considered white, because the definition is not skin color alone. It's complex and murky, because race is fundamentally a lie, except in our society. White supremacy is racist as all hell. It is the obvious extreme end of the spectrum of white supremacy that we usually think about. But it's a spectrum. And those folks are over there up on the tip of the iceberg getting all the attention, which is convenient for white supremacy culture. Because white supremacy is the elephant in the room. It's the herd of elephants in the room. It is occupying space that we cannot afford, sucking up all the oxygen, and people cannot breathe because of it. John asked you why he was the only black person in this room. I'm going to ask you why there are fewer black Unitarian Universalists in our congregations across the continent today than there were in 1968. If you're feeling personally attacked, insulted, please don't. I am not accusing you of racism. I am trying to get you to see the elephants in the room. Because we cannot deal with them if we cannot see them, if we cannot even acknowledge that they're there where they have been all along. The blunt truth is that America was built on land stolen from the native peoples of the continent, and on labor and lives stolen from enslaved people, most of them black people of African origin. That's the truth. That created the wealth of this fantastically wealthy nation, and it poured it into the hands of a relative few. White supremacy and racism were both designed. They are not accidents. They were designed to benefit a small class in an extremely classist society. And you'll note we're supposed to think we have no classes in America. It's all part of the system. Now, to keep the majority quiet, a relative small portion of social privilege and a little bit of stolen wealth was dribbled into the hands of that majority. White people who aren't wealthy and powerful. White supremacy is not just an extremist ideology. In fact, the vast majority of those who are avowed white supremacists are dupes of the system. They are not wealthy, they are not powerful people, they're not the beneficiaries of the system, but they serve a purpose. They help sustain the system. They help normalize the level of racism and white supremacy that is common, civil, and somewhat polite. You see, the elephants in the room are everywhere in America. When people of color are alone, they can talk about racism, they can talk about white supremacy, they can talk openly about the advantages that people who are white get. They can talk about the elephant in the room. The rest of us avoid it because it's awkward, because it's embarrassing. Church is, there's that word. We can use that one here. Church is a place where, if we're doing it right, we get to practice being fully human. We can talk about awkward, real things: sex, money, class, race, and white supremacy. So breathe. Take that breath. It's going to be okay. In fact, with any luck, talking about this will be rather liberating. But it will not feel comfortable, and that is okay. Growth and spiritual growth are not comfortable. If you think that that is what your spiritual life is supposed to provide you, you have bought into a consumerist society's version of religion and spirituality. This is not all about your comfort. Embrace the discomfort and grow. America is built on white supremacy. The system and the prejudices that mean that people of color are disadvantaged and that white people are given advantages, that's fundamentally it. And of course, most of the real advantages are reserved for the very few, but it still does affect us all. One of the advantages given to most white people is that we don't have to see the elephants in the room. We do not have to be aware of the injustice in the system. It is made invisible in so many ways by things like segregation, which we have not really broken down at all in 50 years, 60 years. A judge down in the South just permitted an overwhelmingly white city to separate itself from an overwhelmingly majority black school district area. The white supremacy is actively at work. Sometimes you can see it if you look. But it is usually invisible to us. It is the water we swim in. It is what seems to be normal. We get to believe the lie that it's this way for everyone, that everyone has bootstraps, sort of, maybe, and that they could pull them up. Life is hard and painful for people who are white. Yeah, it is. But it is not harder and more painful because we are white. It is harder and more painful for people of color because they are not white. That's the system at work. And those of us who are white do not have to see that. That's part of the system. We get taught all that bad stuff that we're vaguely aware of is the fault of people of color, of their culture, their families, their religion, their bad attitudes, their character as people. That's prejudice that white supremacy fosters and feeds. And because it's so outrageous, it keeps feeding us data that, taken out of context, would seem to support those terrible lies. The musical South Pacific has that song that talks about prejudice. You have to be carefully taught, the lyric goes. And we are. We are taught young by the statements of our elders sometimes, but also by their awkward pauses, by their carefully avoiding the elephants, by the implications of their actions, their coded warnings. And we are taught by our media the choices of what news is presented to us and how. What words are used to describe people of color who are doing something, and what words are used to describe white people who are doing essentially the same thing. They're really different words. We are taught by our entertainment, by TV and the movies, who is presented how, who is made invisible, not even on screen sometimes, who is almost certain to be a bad guy, a villain, a criminal. I've told you all about this before, that we are taught these things, that as Oliver Wendell Holmes, himself a racist, observed, we are all tattooed in our cradles with the beliefs of our tribes. Those tattoos are on the inside of our skulls, and we don't much notice them. But you can see them. You can, if you want to, if you go look. There is a set of tests online from Harvard called implicit bias tests. They are designed to get past our conscious beliefs and our aspirations, our lovely beliefs about ourselves. And they can be really uncomfortable and surprising. I first read about them several years ago. The writer talked about his experience. He thought of himself as a pretty unprejudiced guy. But when he took the test about black-white prejudice, it told him another story. And the results were painful to him. Heck, the process was painful. He said what was truly horrifying as he clicked those buttons was that he could see what was happening. He could see from his responses, from the response time, from how long it took him to respond appropriately, that his results were going to tell him what they did tell him. He showed a discernible, significant bias against black people. Even as he actively fought while taking the test to change the results, he couldn't. The tattoos in his head are that powerful. And no one gets those tattoos by choice. They are given to us as infants in our cradles. We come to them young before we have any idea what's going on, and then they are strengthened and filled in as we grow up. We are mostly unaware of them. They are on the inside of our skulls, and it's particularly easy to be unaware of them if we're white. That's one of the first privileges accorded to whiteness. So I went back then and I took that test, and I was terrified because I knew what to expect. I Googled implicit bias test. You can too, if you want to. I encourage you to. You can do this in private. I took the test to find out which elephants resided in my head, dreading the same kind of result as that journalist, and to my surprise and delight, it showed only slight black-white bias. And I was so relieved, and I ascribed that to having been raised by very liberal, open-minded parents, thinking I had been the beneficiary of my upbringing. Spoiler alert, I was so very wrong. Recently, my younger son was introduced to those tests in a college sociology class. He contacted me, upset that he had displayed moderate black-white bias. He was perplexed by this. After all, I had raised him. I homeschooled both my sons all the way through high school, and he had grown up UU in a congregation with openly anti-racist messages. How had he gotten those tattoos? Clearly, if upbringing did it, he should have been less biased than I was. Here's what I think happened. The society is more powerful than we believe. The culture is vastly more influential than we imagine. Yeah, white supremacy culture is effective. Clue. Brendan grew up in America. Racial prejudice is the water we swim in. He absorbed it through his eyes and his skin and his ears. He got taught to be biased, despite all of our efforts as parents. Me. Well, by chance, by sheer fortune, my father's job took us overseas when I was 10. And so I got to see prejudice in very different forms, aimed at different people, sometimes because of race, but different races, and sometimes because of ethnicity. And I got to be the target of some of it because anti-American feeling is very real. I got to soak in different water, not cleaner water. There is as much prejudice in Australia and Europe as there is here. It's just different. They're people too. But not having soaked in American racism the whole time I grew up, well, by pure chance, by nothing but good fortune, by grace, some of those tattoos did not get filled in, and that is just luck. It is another form of privilege. There are other implicit bias tests. In fact, I went on the other night and took some of them because there are more than there were several years ago. There are so many things we can go and examine about ourselves if we want to, or as white people, we can avoid that. Me, I have tattoos about other things. I just missed that one, mostly. And yes, I took those tests in private, and I am deeply ashamed about some of those things that someone else tattooed on the inside of my head, and I will be working for the rest of my life to eradicate those. And I know I will not succeed. It's hard and painful to remove tattoos. The culture is so powerful, so powerful. Many blacks who have gone and taken those tests have discovered that they have an implicit bias against blacks. They've been tattooed too. White supremacy is throughout our culture. It affects all of us and all of our institutions. America was built on it. Just because we have consciously rejected the most egregious forms of open, legal racism doesn't mean it went away. And the election of our president has revealed so much that was hidden or suppressed for so many of us. The very powerful strains of racism and sexism and so many other isms that we wanted to think we'd moved past, or moved past mostly. But it took generations to build these systems, and it will take generations to break them down. Generations truly devoted to dismantling those systems, not just demonizing the people who have acted out of their bias. If we focus on the people, we can scapegoat. We're good, they're bad, they're out, now we're pure. Cleaning up this racist Superfund site that is America is not going to be fast or easy, but it is absolutely necessary if we are ever going to build the beloved community. America was built on white supremacy, and white supremacy has never been dismantled. It has been chipped at a little here and there, but mostly we have focused on the most blatant and shocking, offensive examples. The white shining tip of the iceberg floating in contaminated water. The public racism of the Klan, of neo-Nazis, of lynchings and beatings and Jim Crow laws. But you know here, because a few years ago, many of you read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, that it didn't go away. It just changed its face. The mask. It turned into a war on drugs that particularly targets black people and other people of color, minorities, and poor whites, who can be sacrificed to the system as well. It turned into a prison system, increasingly a for-profit prison system, which takes advantage of that loophole in the Constitution that allows slavery as a punishment. So we still have slavery, and it is still mostly of black people, people of color. And it is for profit. You can go and find modern-day enslaved people picking cotton and doing other kinds of work in America, legally. And when they get out, they are generally stripped, legally, but so immorally, of the rights that we think of as fundamental to citizenship and freedom and life in America. They can't vote. And we're taught that's the fundamental right of a democratic society. Cannot vote. They cannot get public benefits to go to college. Go out and improve yourself. You're out of prison. Get your life together. Get a job. Pull it. You cannot get there. They have to check the box, announce their status as felons, so that they can be legally discriminated against by the rest of us in housing, hiring, and so many other places. White supremacy. The above the waterline part of white supremacy is there to see. It's easy if you want to look. But most of it is and always has been below the waterline, and you have to go looking for it. Maybe a little bit of it has melted into the water, but the water was always contaminated. And we here, we are infected with white supremacy too. Unitarian Universalism did not protect my son from it. It did not protect me from it. We grew up, UU. Coming through the doors here did not magically purify you. I am so sorry. We do not have rituals and ceremonies to cleanse you of your white supremacy, nor would they work. Unitarian Universalism, as we know it here, is American in its origins. It was built by Americans. Our churches were built with money that came directly and indirectly from profiting on stolen labor of enslaved people here from the mills that were taking cotton and indigo from the South, which was the result of slave labor. Our institutional structures are typically American. That means that they support and sustain and enforce American norms, which means white norms. We are so used to that we do not see it. We do not feel it. We think of it as inescapable and normal and necessary. It is invisible to us if we are white. It's comfortable if we are white. So what brought this to the fore now? Why are 2/3 of all UU congregations hearing messages and doing teach-ins and programming about white supremacy today or next Sunday? Because events at the Unitarian Universalist Association made us aware of the problems there. It was pointed out to us, it was pointed out to the white people in the room, that a recent hiring, it was pointed out to us by a woman of color, a Latino, that a recent hiring decision, if we looked at it, showed a pattern of systemic racial bias. All of the top hired staff were white and had been white and have always been white. It's not that particular hiring was an egregiously racist act. We don't know that. We have these lovely systems that are wrapped up in things like meritocracy, which is a lie much like the divine right of kings, and systems that allow us to not see what they are doing. So it's not about that hiring. It's about what we saw when it was pointed out to us, that the data shows us this pattern. If you're willing to look at it, it is obvious. And I will not go into all the details because it would take way too long, and we're going to go over time today anyway. But if you want to know more about this, come talk to me. I'll tell you the details. Or you can go online. This is no secret. But the result was that some people got rather defensive, which is a feature of white supremacy culture. And foolish things got said, which was itself an incident and a crisis. And some people looked at the situation and said, if this has been going on, and it has so clearly been going on, then I am part of the problem. And maybe my leaving will help us all to solve this and fix it. And they resigned. And having multiple leaders at the top of an organization resign creates a crisis. So we have been dealing with that crisis. Those resignations included the president of the UUA, our first Latino white president. It meant that there has been a lot of anxiety and misinformation floating around I am a trustee of the UUA. It has been no fun at all to be a member of that board for the last month. There has been this stream of upset and angry and occasionally supportive messages. Staggering number of messages. It's public. The UUA board tries to be as transparent as it can. You can go online and see the board packets for what was done and when they're organized for what's upcoming. The communications are part of that if you want to see them. There are 280 pages of emails telling the board what to do, telling us how bad we'd been, telling us that we had driven people to resign when no one's resignation was asked for or sought. The system is so anxious. We've had to start dealing with that problem, with that whole situation, which included trying to start addressing this white supremacy culture we had been woken up to, that is built into our structures and system. And we had to appoint a new president, an interim, to serve for 3 months until a new president is elected. Now there's a fun job to get. For 3 months, you get to win this position and hold this sack of, There is a learning curve. There is a learning curve in any job. There is a lot to do normally, plus everything that comes as a result of this set of incidents and the decision to face up to and commit to start dismantling white supremacy. So we appointed 3 co-presidents. We're going to need them all. They are all highly qualified. One of them is the former president of the UUA. One of them is a theologian and an ethicist who is a professor at one of our seminaries. One of them is a very long-term UU who has done so much for us that he was given the Distinguished Service Award several years ago. One of them is Latina. All 3 of them are black. Which triggered fascinating emails about why couldn't we find any white people to serve? White supremacy at work, right there. Wanting to be centered, wanting to be in charge, wanting to know why I'm not there with someone who will not disturb me somehow. Now, 3 months. For 3 months. Now, understand, those emails are coming in with the full knowledge, because those people have to be paying some attention, with the full knowledge that 3 months from now, we will have a white president of the UUA, because all 3 candidates are white. Talk about anxiety. And because they are all women, we will have our very first female UUA president. But white supremacy is so anxious that 3 months of leadership by 3 black UUs with a specific charge to help us address our hiring system and our culture of white supremacy, and there are people who are losing their minds. They are going to leave their churches. We are doing something terrible. We're stealing their faith. If that's their faith, it's not mine. And there is a lesson there. I mentioned that there are fewer black UUs now, not just here. There are fewer black UUs in America, certainly in congregational leadership, than in the late 1960s. We screwed up. There's the evidence. We fumbled wrestling with race and racism and white supremacy then, and many, many black UUs left, along with plenty of their anti-racist white allies. And almost none of them ever came back. And pained and hurt and confused and lost in white supremacy, we went silent. our numbers became whiter. And the people coming through our doors do feel that whiteness. They feel the whiteness of UU culture. If they are white, they probably don't notice it. It's entirely comfortable. This is the water they have gotten to swim in. They have found people of a like mind. If they're people of color, it's something that they decide to tolerate if they stay. Or they leave, and they so often leave. They visit thinking that what we say we offer sounds like what they would like and what they're looking for, but it comes at the price of putting up with so much whiteness and pretending it's not there. And even Unitarian Universalist youth, those raised with this faith, they leave. Both those who are white and those of color, but particularly children, youth of color. So if we want to grow, if we want to share what we have to learn to dismantle the white supremacy culture. We have to learn to make room for others, which doesn't just mean shoving over in the seats so that people who are coming in a little later can get to the rows without climbing over you. We're going to have to make space. We have to make it comfortable enough for people to come in and not go, "Oh, Lord, this place is so white." It means becoming comfortable and accepting and embracing of other cultural norms, something beyond the norm of America. It means discomfiting ourselves. We do just fine with hair color and interesting dress, and now we're going to have to get comfortable where the rubber really meets the road. In services with people clapping at music. It's okay. You don't have to if you don't want to. There is more than one culture. There are people who jazz hands. There are people who want to applaud. There are people who want to sit and just quietly absorb. Do it for yourself, but do not push other people. Make space. There are people who would like to stand up and dance in the aisles, but they know they're going to get stared at and treated as strange. You don't fit here. There are people whose upbringing and culture and history, and almost all of us bring something in from the outside here, right? 90% of us are converts to UUism. So you have some background. There are lots of people, black and white and other colors in America, who bring other religious cultures with them and want to do something like stand up and say, "Amen." Okay, no amen. And the whiteness in the room suppresses that. You don't have to tell them, "We don't do that here," though there are people who would. This is not a church. You need to embrace it and make it comfortable. You may even have to do something that's not really in your comfort zone. Stop enforcing that norm. Essentially, every distinctly American form of music, from jazz to gospel, from blues to rock and roll to rap and hip hop, comes out of the black community. Yeah. And most of those forms are being adopted and co-opted and colonized by whites. It is so clear to anyone who looks that there is this vast richness outside of the American mainstream, and we want it to be part of what we have. But instead of taking it, maybe we could include it. If we dismantle white supremacy, then this will no longer be an abusive relationship. There will be people who will want to be here, white, black, Latino, Asian, who want to share with us what they bring to the table. But they're not going to do it if the price is having to leave themselves outside the door. If we will commit to dismantling this white supremacy culture and our narrow norms, we will all be richer and better off, and with a little luck, we will all get free. Because none of us are free while anyone is oppressed. And folks, whether you know it or not, we have been part of oppressing other people. Oppress them right out the door. We can learn to start to clean up the water that we swim in, just as we have learned to clean up America's rivers and waterways of the junk and sewage and pollution and oil that used to make them toxic waste sewers, capable of bursting into flame. We can do better. Won't be pure anytime soon. People will be doing this. It may not ever get pure. But we could just imagine what it might look like here if we had not screwed up in 1968, if all those people of color had stayed, if they had invited their friends and family to come to the place that embraced them. Doesn't look like that now, but we could start to build that. It may not look like that in our lifetimes, but it could. If you will imagine it and build it. Let them choose to participate in that dismantling work. But it is white supremacy culture, and it is principally our job. Don't look at the only black person in the room and think he'll do it. Not his job. Look at how we act. Look at how we treat people. Look at how we talk to each other. Look at how we dress. Look at our structures and our systems. Look at what you assume. Look at how we worship. Good Lord, this is so white. Truly, the Black Lives of UU group held a convening down, I've now forgotten where it was held, recently, down in the South. Might have been New Orleans. They got together. They're all UUs. It was UU worship. Some of it was streamed so people could see it. It wasn't so white. There was room for other people, other culture, other ethnic expressions to be in the room. And there was stuff that we would look at and say, yeah, that looks like stuff we've done. We weren't thrown out of the room. We just had to be out of it so the rest could be there. Because whiteness doesn't like to make any space. Listen for the implicit norms and messages. What is acceptable? What is not welcome? That's not religious music. Look at what and who is not permitted any power. Remember, this process will not be comfortable. It will not be easy. There will be surprises, there will be errors, there will be painful mistakes, there will be embarrassment. Let me tell you, on the UUA board, I have been embarrassed. I have been called out. I have stuffed my foot in my mouth. It's gonna happen. You have to get used to the taste of your shoe leather. And you have to be okay with being embarrassed and not get defensive. There are people who are legitimately angry, and so the tone of being called out may not sound loving, but you are being offered an opportunity to be called in, to say, not defensively, go to the place that says, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I screwed up. Help me figure out how to do the work. Don't do it for me. I'm not asking you to tell me it all, but tell me where I start. Help me figure this out. That's okay. Be gentle with each other. Be gentle with yourselves. If we are going to do something new and novel in this faith, which is to accept something other than perfection, which is part of white supremacy, if it's going to be okay to be imperfect and broken and trying to do better and heal, you are going to have to be gentle and accepting of yourselves as you are and hold yourself to what you want to be. And you're going to have to do that for other people. They cannot serve as your scapegoats. They will not carry away our sins. Be gentle with yourselves and each other. Make it easy to apologize and please accept the apologies, even if you need time to go cool off. Ask for information. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It is a growth experience. It's a growth experience. Another growth experience. Aren't you lucky? Let's deconstruct all that stuff that is white supremacy. Let's look at it carefully. Let's build something new, something else, something different, something intentionally inclusive, something that is liberating for all of us. Something that is not oppressive. And that, I believe, will be what it takes for us to build a doorway into the beloved community. May we find our way through it.